Perhaps I can show you an example, Mr. Jackson, if you can be shown from the tender bundle, tab 94.
I have it here in front of me.
Have you had the opportunity, Mr. Jackson, to view this correspondence previously?
No, I haven't. It's from, I believe, 1998, is it? Well before my time on the governing body.
I'm referring to the last week, Mr. Jackson. Have you had the opportunity to look at this correspondence?
I've been caring for my father. I wish I could have had time to prepare properly, but I haven't been able to. And I assume the Commission was wanting to know what I could contribute personally from my experience. So, no, I haven't had a chance to read all these.
Yes, well, I'll take you through it, Mr. Jackson. You'll see this is a letter in April 1998 from the Australia branch to the Governing Body Service Committee. Now, I understand, of course, you're not on the Service Committee, but you'll see that Australia branch says we are replying now to your letter, and it's referenced concerning the possibility of putting something in writing on the subject of confidentiality and the law in relation to child abuse matters. We appreciate the opinion of the writing and service committees, and we thank you for the opportunity to comment further. We're sorry to be so long in replying, and so on. And then in the next paragraph, up till now, the brothers generally expect that the elders will keep all matters confidential, since this has been stressed a number of times. In Australia, it has happened that some elders have been prepared to accept punishment for contempt of court rather than disclose confidential information. However, we are now saying that elders should comply with the law where mandatory reporting is required if there is no exemption available to them. And then in the next paragraph, it has been suggested that the following be printed in a question box in our Kingdom ministry. It would be necessary to schedule it as part of the service meeting program unless we simply ask the presiding overseer or another elder simply to read the question and answer in the announcement part of the meeting. And then what is proposed is set out. Do you see that?
Yes, I see that.
And then you'll see there's a reply to that letter at tab 96.
96.
On the 24th of July, 1998.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I see that.
You'll see at the foot of the page, it's from the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania for the Service Committee. And it references the letter of 28 April 1998, referring to the suggestion for a possible question and box in the edition of our Kingdom ministry. And then it says, after carefully considering the matter, it has been concluded that if the branch committee in Australia continues to recommend publishing the suggested material, then it would be appropriate for the branch to feature the suggested question and answer as outlined in your letter. It will not be necessary to schedule the information to be considered on a service meeting program. We'll leave it to the brothers to read the information presented. Now, what that suggests, and I'm providing you with the opportunity to comment on this or answer it, Mr. Jackson, what that suggests is that even matters of that detail are, firstly, as a matter of practice, put to Bethel in New York for approval, and secondly, require such approval or consent.
This particular instance, obviously, the brothers in Australia wrote to the Service Committee. But if I could just mention, the importance of this to us is that the governing body gives direction with regard to the church services or the congregation meetings of Jehovah's Witnesses. And this, I assume, and this is the first time I've seen the document, is asking if they can include this in the actual program at the Kingdom Halls. And I assume from what's said here, the governing body has, or the service committee of the governing body has given direction on that. But if I could highlight, the reason for that is it involves our spiritual programs.
Now, in making decisions on the publications, I understand from what you say is that you're guided by the scriptures.
That is correct.
And that involves obviously interpreting the scriptures from time to time.
That is the role of the governing body.
And am I right in understanding that the governing body's interpretation of the scriptures on any particular point might change or develop from time to time?
That is correct as well.
So I think some examples might be, for example, firstly, the question of blood fractions and whether that is or isn't covered by the prohibition for the receipt of blood transfusions.
That is correct as well, but if I could just mention, when blood transfusions were first introduced, there wasn't a lot of options with regard to blood fractions.
Yes, but my point is, or what I'm seeking to understand, is there was an interpretation at one point which said that members of the Jehovah's Witnesses should not receive blood fractions, but in more recent times it's been accepted, as I understand it, that there's no specific scriptural direction on that, so on blood fractions, that is, so that's a matter for the individual conscience of Jehovah's Witnesses.
That's right, and Mr. Stewart, if I may mention, this is an example of the desire of the governing body not to go beyond the scriptures. Clearly we have the direction in Acts chapter 15, 28 and 29 against blood, but if I could also mention, you see, as with anything in the community, more and more knowledge becomes available medically. It can be very overwhelming trying to see all the latest medical research and so on. But the governing body tries to make sure that they don't go beyond what is written. If we see that a direction from the scriptures has perhaps been used too broadly, then we're the first ones to try to correct that.
And I take it too that the state of knowledge about the scriptures, and in particular historical knowledge about scriptures, also improves or increases from time to time.
That is correct, but there are some basic things in the Bible that have not changed right from the beginnings of the Jehovah's Witness religion, and I won't take your time obviously going through those, but it is important to realize what are basic things in the Bible. For example, is the Bible from God? That there is no possibility of us changing our viewpoint on that.
Mr. Jackson, you probably know that we discussed with some of your members earlier in this hearing the relationship of the Bible being written at a time of particular political and social structure and its literal relevance in today's social and political context. Are you familiar with those discussions?
I am. I did hear your question, Your Honour, and I at the time was quite frustrated that I didn't have an opportunity to answer. So I appear this opportunity is now coming.
I'm going to give you an opportunity. Now, it is plain that over time, in relation to matters of relevance to this Commission, our understanding, both medical, social and of the political issues that arise, has changed. And you're aware of that?
I am aware of that, Your Honour.
Now, one of the characteristics that we have identified, and I've spoken about it, and I'm sure you know this, that is manifest in the area of sexual abuse of children within institutions is the child's incapacity to tell an adult about what's been happening to them. You familiar with that problem?
That is correct. I am familiar with that problem, yes.
I've described it by reference to the admonition that was certainly prevalent when I was a child that children are to be seen but not heard. You understand?
Mm-hmm. I do understand.
You're familiar with that concept?
Yes. Yes.
Is it relevant to Jehovah's Witnesses?
Your Honour, in our publications, obviously I can't give you examples now, but we'd be very happy to do that. One of the key things we try to help parents to do is to encourage their children to communicate with them. As a missionary in the South Pacific, the cultures in the South Pacific definitely follow what Your Honour just said. If children are being disciplined or counselled, they're not supposed to speak at all. And over again, we encourage parents, no, children need to express themselves. They need to feel the love so that they can do that.
You've got the Bible there. If you go to 1 Timothy chapter 3,
yes,
verse 4, there's a discussion of a man presiding over his household, having his children in subjection. Now, what does that mean?
That's a very good question, Your Honour. Biblically speaking, the word subjection infers respect and a willingness to comply with direction. It does not...
Your Bible then provides a reference back to Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4.
That is correct.
Which imposes the obligation on fathers to bring their children up in the discipline and admonition of Jehovah. What's the discipline of Jehovah? So,
Your Honour, the original language word there, discipline, it indicates a process of teaching, educating, making a disciple.
Well, from that reference in Ephesians, your Bible takes us back to Proverbs chapter 13, verse 24.
Proverbs 13:24, yes.
And the exact quote is, whoever holds back his rod hates his son. What does that mean?
So, Your Honour, you'll notice there's an asterisk there on the term rod, and you see the footnote? Yeah. Discipline or punishment. So, in the application of this, the term rod is used as a symbol or a metaphor to indicate the authority to give some punishment. For example, in a modern-day setting, my father could say to me, I don't go to the movies because I had broken some of the rules of the home.
So it's not about inflicting corporal punishment then?
It absolutely is not about inflicting corporal punishment.
It would have been when first written, wouldn't it?
How people applied it back then at that time, of course, is open to question.
Well, what you're telling me, as I understand it, is that your religion, your church, is prepared to interpret the Bible having regard to contemporary social attitudes and standards. Is that right?
Obviously, Your Honour, we need to take that into consideration, but the primary responsibility we have is to think, what does Jehovah God mean by this? And we look at other scriptures. One of the problems that many folk have when they read the Bible is they take one verse and they assume it means something out of context or not in reference to other scriptures. So for our understanding, Jehovah has said that children should be raised in a loving environment. Jesus was raised in such an environment.
Well, I've taken you to the way your own church constructs the biblical references, which, as we've noticed, takes us back to Proverbs. Correct?
That is correct.
But what you've given us is the understanding which your church now has about how that's to apply in contemporary society. Is that right?
That's a good question. Obviously, I can only speak about what we understand this to mean now, but I would argue the case that even back in ancient times, God did not have in mind for children to be beaten up in a bad way.
Does your church accept corporal punishment of children?
Our church accepts the family arrangement and expects that parents have the responsibility to discipline and raise their children.
That doesn't answer my question. Do you accept corporal punishment?
In our literature, I think you'll see time and time again, we've endeavoured to explain that here, discipline is referring to more a mental point of view. I
regret to tell you, you're still not answering my question. Sorry. Do you accept corporal punishment?
No.
You don't?
Not personally, no. And not as an organisation. We don't encourage it.
But do you prohibit it?
Our literature has pointed out that the true way to discipline children is by educating them, not giving corporal punishment. Your Honour, I can only tell you the spirit behind our writings.
Now, I'm sure you know that one of the problems for survivors revealed by their evidence in this very hearing is their concern about having to approach men within the church to tell their story and then have that story assessed and judged by men alone. Do you understand?
I do understand that, Your Honour.
Now, in the society in which you live and which I live, we have seen significant change, although perhaps not yet complete, in the role which women play in the decision-making and government of our society, haven't we?
We certainly have.
Yeah. And that's a reflection of a contemporary understanding of the role and contribution which everyone in our society can make to the common good, isn't it?
Yes.
And I'm sure you know of the concerns expressed by the women who have given evidence in this hearing about the confrontation and difficulty in that confrontation which they found in approaching a male dominant structure. You understand that?
I do understand that, Your Honour.
Is there room for the church to change that?
That's a very good question. I'm glad you asked that. Is there a chance to make elders women or make women elders? No. There is no leeway there. But, Your Honour, if I could just mention...
Why is that? Can you tell me why that is?
Sure, yes. If we turn to first...
Is it because of a literal application of the Bible?
Your Honour, it goes back to the theme of the Scriptures right from the creation of Adam, right through Israelite times to the Christian era. But in all fairness, may I just say something with regard to that?
Oh, certainly.
You see, the role of women in the Jehovah's Witness religion is a very dignified role. We don't make women, well, we certainly do not want women to feel like second-rate citizens. In God's view, men and women are equal. But even people who fly aeroplanes realize you can't fly an aeroplane by committee. There has to be a pilot and a co-pilot. And that's the Bible arrangement, not because of any lack of intelligence or lack of ability on the part of women. It is an arrangement that has stood the test of time. Now, within that arrangement, the Bible clearly states that a man does not have absolute authority over a woman, and a woman is a co-worker, a complement, the Bible refers to as that. So I think in the context of understanding how women are treated among Jehovah's Witnesses, I think if you investigated further, you would see there are very many happy women in the marital arrangement.
It used to be the case that all of our women were, all of our pilots were women, wasn't it? We changed that.
All of our pilots were, did we?
Were men.
Oh, men? Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, but we're men, yes.
Yeah, we're men, and we've changed that now, and we have women who are pilots. Why couldn't the church accept that women can contribute to the decision-making processes, particularly in relation to allegations of sexual abuse brought forward by women?
The answer, Your Honour, is that we expect women to be involved in that. But in the actual role as elders within the Christian congregation, there is a very firm standard set there. There is no leeway whatsoever for that in the belief of Jehovah's Witnesses. But if I could mention, some of the reports that you've considered are from 25 years ago. And if I understand correctly from what little I heard of the Commission in the last few days, Mr. Spinks very accurately described that there has been more an awareness of Jehovah's Witnesses to make sure that any victim who has been a victim of a horrible crime does not be required to actually go before three men. We've made changes, Your Honour, because those changes in the actual technicalities of the policies don't change. They're not affected by the actual Bible principles, except the very important principle of showing love, empathy and concern and trying to avoid any form of trauma. And that's our desire. If it wasn't perfect before, which it wasn't, we've tried to change that. And we will make further changes when we consider the recommendations of the Commission.
Well, we'll come back to your processes later on. I'll leave you now with Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Just on the last point, Mr. Jackson, with regard to a survivor of sexual abuse having to make the allegation directly to the accuser, do you agree that in those circumstances, should a survivor have to make the allegation in the presence of the accused?
I agree that it would be better for them not to do that unless the victim wants to do that.
Yes, well, that's why I phrased my question in the way that I did, and so I'll repeat it, that do you agree that in those circumstances the survivor should have to make the allegation in the presence of the accused?
Sorry, I don't understand your question. Could you rephrase it?
Do you agree that there are no circumstances in which the survivor of a sexual assault should have to make her allegation in the presence of the person whom she accuses of having assaulted her?
I agree that that is the case.
And as I understand you're saying on your understanding that that's not required by your rules. In other words, your rules do not require the survivor of a sexual assault to have to make her allegation in the presence of the person whom she accuses as having assaulted her.
If I understand your question correctly, from what I've heard from Mr. Spink's testimony, that is not something that we require now. I'm prefacing this in the fact that it's not my field that I work with every day. Mr. Spinks and those who work in the service department work with these matters, but that is my understanding.
Yes. And so do you accept then that that should be made clear in your documents, manuals and instructions? In other words, that it should be made clear that a survivor of a sexual assault should not have to make her allegation in the presence of the person whom she accuses as having assaulted her.
Absolutely.
Now, Mr. Jackson, can a branch committee publish its own manuals and guidelines in respect of judicial committee procedures for responding to allegations of child sexual abuse?
I would think it would be unusual for that to happen. Seeing it's not my field per se, I couldn't give an inclusive answer with regard to that, but as far as a general principle goes, I would expect that they would get back to the Service Committee on it.
Well, what we see in the documents that we have that govern this issue currently is that they are documents which originate under the auspices of or with the approval of the governing body. So I'm referring to... Yeah, sorry, Mr. Jackson.
Sorry, my apologies.
So I'm referring to organise to do Jehovah's will, shepherd the flock of God, and the guidelines that are published to the branch committees.
Thank you. It's a rather long question, but if I've understood it correctly, we would expect the general framework of what we do to be published as approved by the governing body. But you see, when we say published, letters are published by the local branches that indicate any variance that may need to take place with regard to those policies. So that's why I was just hesitant to say that it's all-inclusive.
Well, if the Australia branch, for example, was to decide that the investigative step which precedes the appointment of a judicial committee need not be done by two elders, but can in Australia be done by a woman acting on their behalf, would that be something that would be open to the Australia Committee to follow or to adopt?
Mr. Stewart, I certainly would hope that the Australia Branch Committee would get back to the Service Committee with the reasons why that's needed, and then eventually I would hope that would get to the governing body so that we could approve whatever changes are needed worldwide.
But it may be that the branch committee in Australia has a different view on these matters than the branch committee in some other country. We'll take one close to home, New Zealand, for example. Well, let me do one further afield anywhere, if you like. The Philippines may take a different view. Is there space for the branch committees to have different investigative procedures in different parts of the world?
To answer your question, the answer is yes, that is possible. But if the reason for doing so is to avoid trauma, then that's something the governing body is interested in. We want to see how we can encourage all the countries to avoid that. But if it's a matter of technicality that they need to do it a certain way, then yes, we would expect they would at least notify us, and there could be differences.
Mr. Jackson, is there any biblical impediment to a woman being appointed to investigate an allegation?
There is no biblical impediment to a woman being involved with the investigation. In fact, I think... Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Your Honour.
No, you continue.
And I think that's one of the benefits of the Royal Commission, as what has been brought to light, is that certainly it is good for a woman to be involved, particularly some of these sensitive areas. But if I could just mention, many of our publications are very broad in aspect. We're not just talking about this one aspect of child abuse, which is a horrific crime, but it can also, the same principles are used for other sins such as drunkenness and other things the Bible mentions. But in this sensitive area, yes, I think the Commission has clearly shown that it would be good for women to be involved.
Is there any biblical impediment to a determination, a judicial determination, being made by a body which includes women, although the elders thereafter may respond in terms of the as the decision maker in relation to what happens to someone after a decision has been made as to the truth or not of an allegation?
That's a good question. Could I just mention first, Your Honour, something, please bear with me on this. The judicial system that Jehovah's Witnesses use is not in competition with the criminal justice system. We respect that, and we feel that that's something that the community needs to make use of. But also, if I can just highlight, any victim is not viewed as someone that needs to stand before a judicial committee. They did not do anything wrong. They're the ones that have been victimized. They need the help. Now, to answer your question directly, women can be involved in this very sensitive area, but biblically speaking, the role of judges in the congregation, it lays with men. That's what the Bible says, and that's what we endeavour to follow.
Can you give me the reference for that?
Yes. In the scriptures,
that is judges being only men. Not elders, but judges being only men.
Okay, I would have to check it. I think Deuteronomy is one of them, but with regard to 1 Timothy chapter 3, 1 Timothy chapter 3, and I'm sure Your Honour, you're very familiar with this. In verse 1, the statement is trustworthy. If a man is reaching out to be an overseer, he is desirous of a fine work. The overseer should therefore be irreprehensible, a husband of one wife, moderate in habits, sound in mind, orderly, hospitable, qualified to teach, not a drunkard, not violent, but reasonable, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money, a man presiding over his own household in a fine manner, having his children in subjection with all seriousness. In biblical times, the same expression that is used for elder is also used for older man. And when we're translating, of course, that is my field, sometimes it is hard to decide whether it means elder as in a position or older man. But definitely when it speaks of judges at the gates in Israel, we're talking about older men. But I apologize, Your Honour, seeing you asked this question, I cannot give you the exact scriptural reference, but we'll be happy to do that.
We would appreciate it, because one possible modification to meet this issue of the lack of women as judges of allegations brought forward by women against men may be a modification of your process to include women in the judicial determination step. You understand?
I do understand, Your Honour, and we will make sure you get those references.
And can you understand how a woman, a young woman, any woman might feel when allegations which she makes of having been sexually assaulted by a male are determined exclusively by men? In the context of a police station, I can understand that, Your Honour, but please, may I also mention the role of these elders. They are friends of those in the congregation. Their role is to shepherd, help, care for. And so although perhaps a young person may feel that way, and we would do everything we can within the Bible parameters to make sure that that is eased so that a person isn't put in that very difficult situation. But still, ultimately, the decision, maybe without that person, would be made. And the decision is not concerning the criminality. That is the criminal system. The decision is concerning the spiritual cleanliness of our congregation and the rehabilitation of those that commit sins. That's to concentrate on the abuser. But what I'm talking about is the position of the person who's been abused. Do you understand?
I do understand that.
See, all that you've just said is talking about it from only one perspective, you see?
Mm-hmm. So from the other perspective, with a victim, the main thing for us is helping, supporting, and guiding, and women will be involved with that. You see, the Judicial Committee is not judging the victim. The elders in the congregation and the women in the congregation have the obligation to give full support to any victim.
Well, that may be so, but the point I was seeking to have you address was, can you understand how a woman might feel when allegations which she brings forward against a man in the congregation are judged are considered and judged entirely by men?
Obviously, I'm not a woman, so I wouldn't like to speak on their behalf, but the two of us, I'm sure, could understand from what has been expressed and believe that perhaps there would be a hesitancy there.
And can I add this to the question, because it's one of the factual circumstances we face in this hearing. Can you understand the circumstance for a woman who brings an allegation against an elder, who is a friend of the others, who must judge the truth or otherwise of the allegation? Can you understand how that person must feel?
I can try to understand it, Your Honour, yes. But again, could I ask, and again, this is not my field of activity, but as far as I understand, we have a process in place whereby a neutral member, like a circuit overseer, will be involved with such a sensitive case.
It would be the case, would it not, that even a circuit overseer is going to know an elder well?
They should be familiar, but they also know the victim well. You see, it's not taking into consideration the spiritual responsibility. You see, these elders are not paid to do their job. They do it because of love and concern and wanting to shepherd the flock. So I think what we're missing is the spiritual element to this whole thing, where people are comfortable talking to one another.
Well, I don't know whether you heard the evidence of the survivors here. Did you hear that evidence?
No, unfortunately, that was a bad time for me caring for my father. I apologise, but I will look forward to hearing a summary of it.
Yes, Mr. Stewart.
Yes, because, Mr. Jackson, for example, the elders who hear these allegations, one of the things they have to do is to measure the credibility of the person who says that she suffered abuse. Is that not right?
Yes, as a prosecutor would also measure the evidence that he does before he goes to a case.
Well, not so much the prosecutor. Perhaps you're thinking of the judge.
Sorry, no. If I understand correct, well, I'm going way out of my field because I'm not a lawyer, but I thought any case that would go to the police and then brought to the prosecution, you'd have to at least establish there was some validity. Yes, maybe that's not the case in Australia.
Well, the point is this, Mr. Jackson, isn't it, that you've appreciated, I think, that an elderly man may be in a difficult position to understand just how a young woman, for example, making an accusation or an allegation of child sexual abuse feels in having to make that allegation.
That is true, but at the same time, perhaps someone who's never experienced the trauma that these victims have felt, even a woman may find that very hard as well, because it's such a personal experience.
But you'll accept, I'm sure, that in many instances where a woman or young woman makes such an allegation, she would feel a lot more comfortable having to make the allegation and explain the circumstances to another woman.
I can't say that I would give a comment on that, Mr. Stewart, because you see, again, it takes away the consideration of the relationships in our congregations. It's not like your churches where people just go to church and don't talk to one another. Their congregations do become familiar, and there can be a friendship. So I agree at the point you're trying to get at. We need to know what the victim is comfortable in doing with regard to who they speak to.
Well, you gave us a scripture, 1 Timothy 3 verse 1, which, as I understood it, was the authority for the principle that, as it's put there, an overseer, but in, I think, modern language, an elder, must be a man. Is that right?
That's correct.
And is there a scriptural reference, and perhaps this is the one you said you'd need to come back to us on, is there a scriptural reference which says that the investigation of allegations of serious misconduct must be done by an elder?
If I could just clarify your question a little, Mr. Stewart. You see, what I think you've heard in the Commission is that we have said that women can be involved in all these various aspects leading up to the actual decision-making, whether or not someone is spiritually qualified to remain in the congregation. So just that one aspect, the actual judicial committee itself, is where we believe that men would be involved.
Well, Mr. Jackson, that's the question I was putting to you, you see. I was wondering whether you could have a structure which meant that the judicial decision as to whether or not the allegation was true could be determined by a body capable of having women represented on it, and that body's decision would then be taken to the elders in relation to decisions to disfellowship. Do you understand?
I understand, Your Honour.
Well, is it possible to make that change?
It is possible to make sure that elders are fully aware of the whole story. But for women to be elders in the congregation, that is not possible.
No, Mr. Jackson, I wasn't asking you that. I was asking you to consider whether the process may involve a determination which we outside the church would call a judicial determination. That is the allegation true or false? And then that decision having been made, the elders would then make a decision as to the consequence, being disfellowship or otherwise. Do you understand?
I do understand.
Could women be involved in the determination of whether or not the allegation is true?
Well, Your Honour, if I could say, I think they already are involved.
Not in the decision, Mr. Jackson. Please address my question.
Okay. Yes. Well, please, could I just use an example? If an underage child it says that something has happened, and then two women are involved with helping that person, surely they have to decide whether or not the facts are true and present those to the elders. Otherwise, how would the elders know what the facts are?
Mr. Jackson, you're not dealing with my question.
I'm sorry, I apologise.
Would you like me to put it again? Would you like me to put it again?
If you would, please.
Your process at the moment has a judicial determination which is made by the elders, and that's the point at which a decision is made as to whether the allegation is true or false. Do you understand that? Mm-hmm. You do?
I do understand that, Your Honour.
Is it possible for the process to be modified so that that decision can be made by a body which could include women? That is, the decision as to whether or not the allegation is true or false, made by a body which could include women, and that decision would thereafter be acted upon and a decision made as to whether or not to disfellowship by the elders. Do you understand?
I do understand, and I apologise, Your Honour, for not answering directly. I didn't understand fully what you were saying. The answer, Your Honour, is such a situation would be worthy of us considering and doing research and checking the scriptures. Yes, the possibility of considering that is there.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I apologise again.